It all starts for me with an email that I got from one of my subscribers named Clint. Subject, did you read The Why is Everything? Article or email substance, curious what you thought. I read/listen to basically everything you produce and don't recall you discussing this book. I have two thoughts. One, I can't believe that all NFL coaches did not operate like Kyle Shanahan and his friends, explaining why to players, adopting schemes to personnel, constantly evolving, etc. This is professional football! Exclamation point. Two, this book makes me way more positive about Shanahan. I follow your guy, Grant Cohn, after you had him on, and he's always killing Kyle, and I get some of his criticisms, but he still seems 100 times better than the alternative Neanderthal approach. So I get that email, Mike. I go, well, I've heard of this book. I've seen excerpts of it bandied about. I've got to read it. And my God, it's fantastic, man. It's so good. And I almost felt this pang of nostalgia reading it. This is maybe a bigger conversation that we can get into. I thought to myself, I don't know if we're ever going to get this mix of access and storytelling again, just by the virtue of how, or vice of how, sports journalism is done these days. But you've had the access for long enough that you can do it, and God damn it, you did it. It's wonderful.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you, and thank you, Clint, whoever you are. I totally appreciate all of that. Here's the book, The Why is Everything, available wherever books are sold or whatever insidious websites you want to click links from. Yeah, I'm really stoked that you say that. I'm not sure Kyle loves it. I know Mike Shanahan loved it, and I'm pretty sure, this is about that crew of coaches, which is Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, Matt LaFleur, Raheem Morris, Mike McDaniel, and their various offshoots. And I got incredible cooperation from virtually everyone. Started taping Mike McDaniel, 7-8 years ago when no one knew who he was, and really got everyone to play along, except Kyle, not as much, who I've known since he's 15. And, it was complicated. I had taken a job at the Chronicle. I was around all the time. But be that as it may, I'm glad that, to Clint and I think other readers, it did illuminate in regards to why Kyle's different and what are some of the good things he does. Because while I'm sure Kyle didn't love some of the things in here, like, Mike McDaniel's belief that Kyle kept changing practice times during the playoffs to, mess him up as he was preparing for his first head coaching interview ever over Zoom with the Dolphins. I think overall, I do think these are exceptional minds, and they have tried to do it a different way.
I understand why he'd be uncomfortable with it, and maybe also not understand that we can take the portrayal of these men in full and not be so judgmental or just regard them as a bad thing. I think they understandably are just fearful of having some of these negative qualities of theirs laid bare and being judged according to it. But what I got from it, I was reminded of, remember the Larry Sanders Show? You ever watched the Larry Sanders Show?
Sure, Gary Shandling, yeah.
Yeah, and Gary Shandling would say in interviews that these characters do love each other, but the business gets in the way. And that's what I took from your book, which I think the foundation of it, you could correct me if I'm wrong, is the 2012 to 2013 Washington Redskins, a team of, I guess, overtly not great accomplishment or note, but it becomes this foundational wellspring from which 5 future NFL head coaches come from. And it seems as though a lot of these guys would be just incredibly close friends with a lot in common, but the pressure of the business and the need to perform, and then later on, how they're going against each other. As somebody who's covered the NBA, was actually struck by how different it is and how hard it is afterwards for these guys to maintain copacetic relationships, because in the NBA, it's just not like that. Steve sees one of his assistant coaches get hired to another team. Kenny Atkinson and the Cavs, maybe they'll play Steve twice a year. Nobody's going to get fired off the result of those games. But in this case, it's so different. It's so different with Kyle Shanahan not only just being a coach, but almost being like a GM. So he's potentially trying to steal Aaron Rodgers and MVP peak Aaron Rodgers away from his buddy Matt LaFleur and betray him in a way, because they all need to be competing for the same things. I'm not giving you a good question, Mike. I'm just rambling. I'm excited about this topic.
No, I'm glad you brought Steve up, because we grew up together and co-wrote a sports column for our high school paper. And so, I bounce these things off of him just as a friend at times when we're texting or talking. And yeah, you're right. Steve is even taken aback by how gnarly it is. And he knows coaches are crazy. Maybe in the NBA, you're just a little bit more at peace with, well, we have Steph Curry and they don't, and we prevailed. But, you brought up the Aaron Rodgers thing. I mean, that's very real. That's more like the NBA, right? If you have Aaron Rodgers in his prime, you have a chance to do incredible things. And if all of a sudden you don't, you might get fired very quickly. And so Matt LaFleur, who, came up as a Kyle Shanahan protege, tried to please him like all these guys did at one point or another by, bringing him plays and getting yelled at when his drawings weren't good enough, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Matt was going through it in 2021 when Aaron was kind of estranged from the Packers after the season, and eventually asking for a trade. The Packers did not want to trade him, and that draft was coming up. And then all of a sudden, this all kind of broke, where you had reports on draft day, or the first night of the draft, and this was the infamous Trey Lance draft for the 49ers. So they were already all in on that, but that Rodgers wanted to leave and that he wanted to go to San Francisco. And Matt LaFleur, who I talked to during and after that a lot, was really taken aback because, not only did he feel like the timing of it suggested a coordinated kind of plot to get Aaron to the 49ers at a time of potential weakness for him, Matt LaFleur. But, you're right. He felt like Kyle might, it was a betrayal in that Kyle had inside information because of his relationship with Matt. Now, from Kyle's perspective, dude, I coach the 49ers. I'm trying to win Super Bowls. Aaron Rodgers may want out. I have to try to go get him. But it got all jacked up. And there's this infamous FaceTime right before the draft that night that we detail in the book, where now Mike LaFleur is the Jets offensive coordinator. The Jets have the second pick. Robert Saleh, also from that 49ers staff, initially as the head coach of the Jets. Mike McDaniel is Kyle's chief offensive assistant now. And Mike McDaniel is on a FaceTime with Mike LaFleur, and Saleh comes in, and there are other coaches in and out. And then Kyle comes in to Mike McDaniel's office on that side of it.
We should probably establish to some of the people listening that Mike LaFleur, brother of Matt LaFleur.
Right. Mike LaFleur, Matt's younger brother, and now working for the Jets. And there's this awkward conversation where, Kyle Shanahan tries to make a joke about the Jets, and are you sure you're going to draft Zach Wilson? Because if you take our guy, we're going to have to, and Michael LaFleur says, what are you talking about? You've already got your quarterback, Aaron Rodgers. And it's like there's kind of a chill in both rooms. And Kyle tries to laugh it off. And then Mike LaFleur says, and Kyle says, hey, tell your brother to call me. He hasn't called me back. And Mike says, well, what do you expect? And now Kyle storms out. The draft's about to happen. Saleh calls him later about something else. He yells at Saleh. It's just a whole thing. And then when the Packers beat the 49ers early that season, Matt LaFleur and Kyle have the chilliest post game ever, which is when I kind of put some of this out for context before the book came out. And then Kyle knocks him out in the playoffs at Lambeau. And, they've patched that up somewhat. But yeah, like Kyle and McVay, there's a chapter in here called Enemy Friends, which is a quote from their mutual friend, Raheem Morris, who's managed to stay friends with everybody somehow, just because by the sheer force of his personality. But, I think he put enemy first for a reason. And yeah, the rivalry and being in that division together, coming in the same year and all that certainly exacerbated the Shanahan-McVay tension, which persists to this day.
I am struck by this tension between the people you come up with who you're close with in that business, who are responsible for elevating you to a certain point, are also the ceiling on your ultimate ambition. That part, it's not quite an enemy-friend dynamic, but Mike McDaniel is this genius helping Kyle Shanahan through team after team after team. And yeah, McDaniel feels that when it was his chance to get hired away. Well, once it's not what he feels like. There was a time where he had another job offer and Kyle told him, I blocked that shit so fast. That dynamic is so interesting and fraught as well. It reminds me, this might not have come to mind for most people reading the book, but The Devil Wears Prada, where Stanley Tucci thinks he's going to get the big gig, but it's actually the Anna Wintour, Meryl Streep character once again asserting dominance, and that's just his role to be the right-hand man, as it were. And that's what Shanahan wanted McDaniel to be, I suppose, but he got out of it and got the job.
Ethan, it's all relative. I mean, the crown jewel would be the Goodfellas scene where Joe Pesci thinks he's getting made and there's a problem. And of course, that doesn't end well. But yeah, no, I've seen it's a crazy business. I've seen people fire their brothers. When Matt LaFleur got the Packer job, he immediately tried to get Mike LaFleur, his younger brother, on his staff, and Kyle blocked it. And didn't feel bad about it. It was like, nah, dude, I don't have to let him out, and I'm not. So yeah, it is a really interesting business. And it's very loaded for, the two main characters of this book, Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay, because of how they entered the business and the nepotism overtones. So, I covered Mike Shanahan kind of as a broken guy, had been the young hotshot head coach of the LA Raiders, and then got fired after returning to the Broncos and accused of disloyalty by Dan Reeves. And as he rebuilt his career, he became the 49ers offensive coordinator, kind of the first guy from outside that Walsh tree after Walsh to run that offense. And then Joe Montana got hurt for the second year in a row with an elbow injury. And Steve Young, who was a broken guy in some other ways, despite his great talent, just wasn't Joe Montana and wasn't good enough for people, in the 49er fan base, certainly. And together they kind of fought through that and forged something epic, culminating in that 6-touchdown performance by Young in Super Bowl 29. And then Shanahan goes to Denver, takes outside zone and incorporates that into the Walsh scheme. And you get kind of the beginning of what is now that Shanahan offense that Kyle has taken to different dimensions, and all the offshoots have kind of put their stamp on. But, it is for Kyle Shanahan, there was always that nepotism overtone, and his personality, he's very, very smart. And he's kind of always had this, like, I know everything, and a brashness about him that, for those of us who know him well, it can be really charming. But I think for a lot of people in the business, it was off-putting. And he didn't worry that much about the nepotism overtones when he asserted himself. Whereas Sean McVay, whose grandfather, John McVay, was the kind of silent partner in those Walsh, DeBartolo, Montana dynasty years as the general manager, he was the reason Sean ultimately got those early opportunities. And Sean kind of went the other way. He was like, I know the stigma and I'm going to work so hard to show people I'm sincere. Not only that I'm a hard worker, which they all are, but that I get that I'm getting extra opportunities and I'm mindful of, the whole thing. And so you kind of had these divergent paths leadership wise, whereas for Kyle, it was always scheme, 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 and everything else is kind of secondary. And his way of leading ultimately became showing players, look, this is what we're going to do, and here's why it'll work, and we're going to expose their weaknesses. And that was effective. Whereas for Sean, it became kind of like a TED Talk where leadership, leadership, leadership. And oh, yeah, I'm pretty good on the scheme side, too. And then you have the people like Raheem Morris and Mike McDaniel who could kind of toggle between the two and see the brilliance in both while trying to do their own thing, their own way. But yeah, it is a wild business. You have, as I said, people fire their brothers, people will backstab their best friends. And sometimes it works out because people understand the weirdness of the business. And sometimes people stay mad at each other for years or decades or forever. It's a wild world.
It is, and is a weird place to take it. I liked the first season of Ted Lasso, less so what I saw afterwards, but I believe Steve Kerr's son wrote for it.
Yeah, he was a writer's assistant that first year, yeah.
And there was an element in it where I went, that's real. That's real. Everything else is unlike anything I know about covering professional sports, but that's real. And it was the nerdy, brilliant assistant coach or manager, whatever we call it in European football, rising up, being entrusted, and then eventually having these tensions and eventually betraying his bosses in a way and worming his way out. And I went, that right there, that's sports. That's what I recognize. That's this business. Because, yeah, I'm saying it's different in the NBA, but back of the bench or outside of the head coach, it's so brutal, man. It's such a political game. It's such a viper's pit back there. And that's something that's largely kept from us. Your book illuminates a lot of it, but that's the element of sports that we mostly don't see. As fans, we see the show on the field. We don't see these backstage machinations.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Ted Lasso because that leads us to one of my favorite social media rants ever, and it comes from the heart, and that is the abomination that is Trent Krim. So Trent Krim, for those of you
of the Independent
don't recall, was the acerbic journalist who would ask the questions in press conferences and ultimately got said assistant Nate to give him some information about Ted Lasso's mental health issues, and it became a big story. And then for reasons I will never understand, Trent Krim felt compelled to source burn, which, as you know, is an absolutely unfathomably unforgettable sin to do under pressure of incarceration, let alone unsolicited because you just feel bad. But, snitches get stitches. Journalists we know have gone to jail and have been willing to go to jail to protect the sanctity of those interactions. And here we're asked to believe that it's somehow okay that Trent Krim tells Ted, hey, by the way, Nate's the one who burned you. So I had some strong opinions on social media. I think I said he should be executed
sacked.
Or, something.
That's the word they use over there. Sacked, at least.
Yeah,
at the very least.
But I said Trent Krim should literally, I don't know if I said he should be executed or, the equivalent of tarred and feathered, whatever. Yeah. But I was strong and to the point where somebody said that I represented everything wrong with society. And I said, yes, you're right. Calling for the execution of a fictional journalist in a television show is absolutely that. But minus the source outing, I'm with you. That is all. That all did feel very real, and the who's getting credit, and obviously these coaches get an oversized share of credit and blame. Thus, the the pressure and the ramifications and all that. But it is a weird world, and in this world, the NFL in particular, they work so hard. Some of it is a badge of honor. Look, I slept in the office, and all that. And they're just looking for those edges. And this group, I think, characterized themselves and continues to, and they're not the only ones, but to me, this is the scientists overtaking the meatheads. For so long in football, it was, just do it because it works. That's how they did it before. And this play works. And it's like, I have a menu and I'm going to pick this running play. I like this play and let's throw this pass. And to these guys, it's an ecosystem. It's all intertwined. It's much more about, it's pliable. There are creative solutions on the fly. It's much more, I'm going to figure out your rules and I'm going to try to exploit them and use those rules against you and then counter your counter move, your inevitable counter move. And that's more of the mindset. And it's instead of don't ask why, it's not only do I need to know why I'm including these things because it all is part of a system, I need to be able to explain that to you so that you'll buy in. And that really is a revolution in the sport, and they're kind of at the forefront of that.